already had a covert deal with the Ayatollah and back in the meantime. So it's within the realm of possibility here. As I show in my more recent book, my brand new book, Provoked, about the new Cold War with Russia. At this time, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who had been the national security advisor under Jimmy Carter and who shared the egg on Carter's face for the Iranian Revolution happening on their watch and the disaster of the hostage crisis and all of that. And this was Brzezinski's humiliation. He's supposed to be the master chess player here, and he screwed everything up. It was on him. And he was a proud man too. It's not like he wasn't. He was quite a character in his way. And yet by 1993, he said, hey, listen, we ought to build an oil pipeline across Iran to the Persian Gulf. That way, one, as a way to stick it to the Russians that we're pumping Caspian oil from Azerbaijan down to Iran and instead of north through Russia. But then also as a way to help to normalize relations with the United States, that we can start working together on oil projects with them. Alexander Haig, who had been Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State, and of course had been Henry Kissinger's deputy under Nixon, and was a hard ass from back in the days of Vietnam War policy. Alexander Haig thought the same thing and had business interests, of course, in doing so as well, but said this is what we need to do. We need to build oil pipelines across Iran to begin to normalize relations with Iran. This is in Bill Clinton's first season in office. This is, the Branch Davidians' corpses are still smoking as this is all going on here in the late spring and early summer of 1993. Later, to fast forward to like 1998, even Dick Cheney said the same thing when he was CEO of Halliburton. He said that God did not see fit to put all our oil where we can get to it. A lot of times it's under the soil of regimes that are kind of nefarious and not the best people where we wish it was, but we need to find a way to do business with them. And we can. And he was specifically denouncing Bill Clinton's sanctions on Iran, saying Bill Clinton should lift those sanctions. Now, what is Halliburton? Halliburton, they don't just build military bases and suck off the dole. Their original company is oil services. In other words, they build oil derricks and oil pipelines and provide the hardware necessary for the oil industry to thrive, including, I guess, offshore platforms and everything else. And so Cheney was saying, my company wants to cash in building oil infrastructure in Iran. Let's get some. They don't talk about this very much, but the British moved right in this century, and British Petroleum has invested tens or even hundreds, I don't know how many billions of dollars, at least tens of billions of dollars in building oil infrastructure in Iran, which is a good reason to hope and think that we still won't go to war with them, because Britain doesn't usually go to war with British Petroleum, if they can help it. But so in other words, Bill Clinton came in and, whatever, it's just statecraft. It's not, anything good about his character or personality or anything to say that he just thought, look, America's the 800 megaton gorilla. We can have what we want. And there's no reason to have a conflict with Iraq and Iran when we can deal with both of them. Now, see, depending on how well you're getting along with them, you might not need to balance against them at all, right? Nobody wants either one of them becoming the absolute dominant force in the region, but there wasn't much risk of that anyway. And so the Israelis' argument was that now that America has beat up on Iraq so badly in Iraq War I, of course, with Israeli encouragement and neocon encouragement here in the United States, now they've left Saddam Hussein too weak to balance against Iran. So now America has to stay to balance against them both. And so that was the policy that Bill Clinton adopted of dual containment. And of course, Rabin, as Trita Parsi says, Rabin promised Bill Clinton, if you do the dual containment policy, I promise I'll do a Palestinian state. And then, of course, that never happened. But that's where that comes from. Now, I'm skipping ahead in the story here just because I'm sort of going by category. So we're going to catch back up to some of these things. But just as long as we're focusing on Iran and Iran's role in the region and America and Israel's policy concerning Iran, I'm just going to keep going on that theme. So bringing us to then the clean break strategy of 1996. And of course, this is going to come up again. But the neoconservatives at this time are on the outs. It's the liberal Democrats are in there. And so the neoconservatives are all cooling their heels at the think tanks. And a very important neoconservative apparatchik named David Wormser, in alliance with Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, a guy named Charles Fairbanks, and a couple others. It was really Wormser that wrote it. And with Pearl's cooperation, Feith disavows the thing now for what it's worth, but not much. But it was really Wormser and Pearl certainly were of the same mind about this. And this is the clean break strategy, which they wrote for the Israeli Institute for Advanced Strategic Studies. So it was not even for an American think tank. It was advice to Benjamin Netanyahu, the incoming prime minister of Israel in 1996, because, of course, people don't know, a Netanyahu fan murdered Yitzhak Rabin in 1995, shot him in the back for daring to pursue a two-state solution. It was a Likudnik settler from the West Bank who murdered the guy. And then once he was gone, the Israeli president and Rabin ally Shimon Peres took power. But he was only there for a few months. And that short time, he launched Operation Grapes of Wrath in southern Lebanon, which was a problem, which will come up again here shortly. Then they held new elections, and Shimon Peres lost, and Netanyahu won. And this is when the Iranians started messing around too. After the Israelis had turned on the Iranians and started demonizing them, the Iranians decided that they could help to screw up Yitzhak Rabin by pouring money into Hamas. Now, Hamas had been a breakoff of the Muslim Brotherhood group, which had been supported in its rise to power by Israel. It wasn't really created by them, but they helped it rise to power, and they would let it keep all its money and even finance it directly. The Shin Bet and Mossad would finance them directly, as well as do raids and lock up all their opponents and leave them kind of the open ground to thrive and grow. And so they had started off as sort of a social services organization. And then more and more, they became their own armed militia and militant and even terrorist group under this guy, Sheikh Yassin, was the leader of Hamas. This was explicit all along as an Israeli policy to divide and conquer the Palestinians. And the best things you can read about this are my two favorite books I keep mentioning. They're so great on all these things is Robert Dreyfuss in Devil's Game and Trita Parsi in Treacherous Alliance. But you can also read Andrew Higgins in the Wall Street Journal and Richard Sale in UPI. Richard Sale's got some really great quotes from Israeli and American intelligence officials admitting why they did all of this. And it was simply to weaken Arafat, to divide and conquer the Palestinians between their sort of secular commie / nationalist PLO. And of course, the people there were all Muslims. So what a great idea to support Muslim fundamentalists, right-wing, reactionary type groups. And the more intransigent, the better. To be the kind of people that are easy to demonize, no partner for peace when the Palestinians are divided and including by these terrorist groups. And so I think Hamas probably did their part, unknowingly or not, unwittingly or not, in helping get Netanyahu elected with their new support they were getting from Iran. And of course, Netanyahu didn't turn the policy back to the policy of the periphery. He kept the Rabin strategy of demonizing Iran, but without the companion strategy of negotiating with the Palestinians. Netanyahu's doctrine always was, we're going to have our cake and eat it too. We're going to sooner or later, we're going to have our alliance with the Sunni kings, and we're going to be safe with our closer Sunni states. And we're still not going to give the Palestinians citizenship or independence. They're just going to learn to lose. And that's been the Netanyahu doctrine since 96. So, understanding that doctrine, that Likud party doctrine, David Wormser comes in and says, okay, Mr. Netanyahu, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to overthrow the Oslo Agreement and the push towards a two-state solution that Rabin had signed with Arafat and with Bill Clinton and all this promise. We're going to not do that. That's what a clean break means. It's a clean break from the Oslo peace process. And they said, well, the problem is, if we just continue the project of stealing Palestine, then we still have to worry about the threat from Hezbollah, the Shiite sort of 51st state of Iran, Iranian supported Shiite militia that in sort of mini state that ruled southern Lebanon. Now, Hezbollah was not created or even really helped to be an enemy the way Hamas was by Israel. But they were a reaction to the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Israel had invaded in 1982 to attack the PLO, but then they stayed and then they abused the local Shiite population, were terrible to them. And that ended up driving the local Shiite population to create the Party of God and their very other, that's Hezbollah, and their other resistance movements. And yes, backed by Iran. Of course, Iran took the opportunity then to support the rise of this Shiite group there. So now in the mid-90s, David Wormser is saying, look, our crisis is we want to break with the Oslo peace process and continue colonizing Palestine, but we don't want to have to worry about Hezbollah on our northern flank, which, of course, is occupied. Southern Lebanon at that time was occupied by Syrian troops, and which also worked with and protected Hezbollah. And then, of course, Syria had an alliance, even though it's a Ba'athist country, is led by the Alawite Assad family. And they're sort of a break-off, an allied close group with the Shiites. And they had a friendly relationship and later a real alliance with Iran. And so here, well, let's go back to our map, folks, and we'll look right at this clean break strategy and the reason for its necessity, according to the likes of David Wormser here, is now at this time, Iraq is light green. They're on the Sunni side in 1996 here, but Iran is the ruling Shiite power and in alliance with Syria, the Alawites. And then you can see this little darkened portion of southern Lebanon there ruled by Hezbollah as well. So now David Wormser is making the argument that this Shiite crescent of power, that Syria is the keystone in the arch of Iranian power and Hezbollah is the threat, because how is Israel supposed to steal all of Palestine if they still have to deal with Hezbollah on their northern flank and they can't fight all three of them? And so this is the motive for coming up with the clean break policy. And the clean break policy, I always feel foolish even explaining it because it just sounds so foolish the way that they put it across. Anyone listening to me would think I'm wrong, but you can go and read it yourself. It's at scotthorton.org/fair use, but you can also find it in other places online. They said the way to break the Shiite alliance is to get rid of Saddam Hussein, to focus on the removal of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Well, you might think that's crazy. Saddam's the Sunni roadblock, blocking Iranian power and keeping it out of the Levant. Why would they want to get rid of Saddam Hussein? The Sunni from the 20% Sunni minority lording it over the Shiite supermajority of the country. Well, it's a harebrained scheme. They thought, and they had been convinced by the Iraqi Shiite exile, Ahmed Chalabi, who was a grifter and an embezzler and a criminal and a shyster, that if the Americans or the Israelis even could arrange a regime change and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, then the Shiites would take over the country, but they would be under the rule of a new Hashemite king. And they would bring in the cousin of, first of all, they said the king of Jordan will wear both hats and he'll be the king of Jordan and Iraq. And then they later adjusted that and said, well, we could bring in the king of Jordan's cousin, King Hussein's cousin, and make him the king of Iraq. And they said, don't worry, see, it's like this. The Hashemites in Jordan, they claim to have the blood of the prophet in their veins and be from his family line. And the way it works is the Shiites are just slaves to that. And they'll just bend right over and do whatever they're told by anyone who claims to have the blood of the prophet. And so and of course, we already control the king of Jordan. And so we'll just have him control the supermajority of Shiite Iraq. And then later they adjusted the plan when the king of Jordan died, and I don't know what happened to his cousin or whatever. And they ended up adjusting the plan. Well, we'll just put Chalabi in there. And there's an accompanying article that comes with
I want to point out that I've heard it said that the belief was that, these I want to say that it's the Shiites, but I could be wrong. Could be the Sunnis. One of the majority, the Islam majorities, um, are believed to be subservient to the Hashemites because of the blood of the Prophet, and so I believe it was either David Wormser or Paul Wolfowitz, could have been both, but they fully believed that all they had to do was install a Hashemite king in each one of those Middle Eastern powers, or just the states in general, and that, said subservient party would just follow whatever they do. Obviously, that's not how it worked, but they'll even attest to this day, from what I've heard, that the um, that specific majority would follow whatever the Hashemite king says, which was clearly a miscalculation and just speculative at best for people who didn't understand the um, frivolity or frailty of Middle Eastern politics, as well as the unpredictable nature of it. But anyway.
A clean break called Coping with Crumbling States. And it focuses on what they call, Wormser calls, he says, we should expedite the chaotic collapse from Iraq to Syria in order to remake Syria as well. They're the real keystone in the arch here, they said. And now, even short of that, they said it would really be the first step in overthrowing Saddam Hussein in Iraq would accomplish most of what they were going for because, as Wormser put it, a free Shiite Iraq would be a nightmare for Iran because the Iranian Shiites would see how good the Iraqis have it and be jealous of that and want to do things their way. At the same time, the Shiite clergy in Najaf, Shiite Islam was invented in Iraq and then spread eastward into Iran. But, all the holy sites and everything, the Shiite shrines and so forth, are all in Iraq. And the highest ranking religious leadership in the country, the Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani and others, they all live down in Najaf. So Chalabi had convinced Wormser that once.
Sorry, I mute my mic on and off so that you don't have to hear the background noise. But I do find it interesting that, Wormser pivoted to say that Syria was really the key player in all this. And you have to ask yourself why, because that's why I was on my phone. I was double checking that they're not a major global oil producer anyway. So other than the fact that it might be easier to take over because of the size and demographic, as people often refer to Afghanistan, they're goat herders. They're less intelligent and sophisticated individuals because of the way their society's built up. However, realistically, Iraq and Iran, because of their oil infrastructure, would have been more pertinent to be the ones that were occupied by America for the benefit of the American, economic system and its foreign allies, especially the Gulf Coast countries that surround it, such as Jordan, Egypt, UAE, Qatar, all of those. So I think even when he's talking about those points, it's very clear to me that, and it should be to anybody else, that because of Syria's proximity to Israel, it should be noted that clearly it was more of a it's important to them and not important to us type of thing. So I just think that's a really interesting fact. But let's continue.
The Hashemites or he take over the country, then they will get the religious clergy in Najaf to invoke their authority and tell Hezbollah in southern Lebanon to stop being friends with Iran. And then, so at that point, Jordan and Turkey and Israel and America will be by far the dominant force in Iraq. Now, this is all completely crazy and stupid and wrong. So, starting with the fact that the Hashemites had already ruled Iraq, the British installed a Hashemite king in the 1920s, and the Shiites didn't cooperate with him at all. They had a fatwa against cooperating with him. And it's true that the Shiites do follow the family of Muhammad, but only the Shiite members of his family that went off that way. Um, no, they do not, and they do not worship the the family line of Muhammad as being, divine or having magical powers or any of this stuff that requires their blind devotion. They're religious leaders. They have a lot of authority, but they don't have total authority as rulers. And
I just want to clarify that a fatwa, by definition, is a formal, non-binding legal opinion or clarification on a point of Islamic Sharia law. So Sharia law is Islamic law, issued by a qualified legal scholar known as a mufti. A lot of times the Ayatollah can be the one to issue those. Khamenei had a fatwa stating that they could not have nuclear weapons prior to his death. Now, obviously, his son probably won't carry those same beliefs with his father and some of his family being murdered, his wife included. But I just, I've always wondered and just took the moment to look it up. So I thought that'd be pertinent information as well.
and so it just was crazy that Chalabi was able to convince is the ignorance of these neoconservatives that they believed this guy was shoveling about how, oh yeah, the Iraqis are just going to do whatever we say as long as you put the Hashemites in power there, or then runner up, put him in power there. And then they'll just do nothing but be friends with Israel after that.